She gave him a false name and a couch to sleep on. He gave her a kindness she'd never known. But hiding behind her bruised wrist and a glittering diamond necklace was a secret that could destroy his quiet world. What happens when a runaway billionaire finds a home with a man who has nothing and everything? She gave him a false name and a couch to sleep on. He gave her a kindness she'd never known. But hiding behind her bruised wrist and a glittering diamond necklace was a secret that could destroy his quiet world. What happens when a runaway billionaire finds a home with a man who has nothing and everything? Our story tonight asks a simple question. What if the safest place on earth isn't a fortress, but a small room filled with quiet, unconditional love? Drop your city in the comments below. We'd love to see where this story is reaching. The rain over the city fell with a kind of weary persistence, a silver curtain that blurred the edges of the world. It was a night for staying in for warm blankets and the low hum of a television. But inside a tiny apartment tucked away on a street, the city had largely forgotten. The only light came from a flickering flashlight. Nathan Reyes held it steady, its beam a small brave sun dancing across the pages of a well-loved book. He was painting pictures with his voice of brave knights and gentle dragons, building a fortress of imagination around his 5-year-old daughter, Mia. She was curled beside him on the floor, her small body wrapped in a quilt that smelled of him, of soap and quiet strength. He was a janitor, a man who walked the silent, empty halls of a downtown office building long after the important people had gone home. To the world he was invisible, one of the quiet heroes who mop the floors so others don't slip. But in this small kingdom of two, he was a king, a storyteller, a man whose wealth was measured not in dollars, but in the depth of his daughter's trust. The power had been out for an hour, but for them this was not a crisis. It was an adventure. It was then that the knock came. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was a fragile, hesitant sound, almost swallowed by the storm like a bird tapping at a window pane. Nathan paused, the words of the story hanging in the air. Mia looked up, her wide, curious eyes, asking the silent question. People didn't come to their door, especially not in a deluge like this. He placed a gentle hand on her head, a silent promise of safety, before rising to his feet. When he opened the door, the storm seemed to rush in a gust of wind and water that made the flashlight beam tremble. Framed in the doorway was a woman. She was soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her face, her fine, expensive-looking coat ruined beyond repair. But it wasn't her disheveled state that held his attention. It was her eyes. They were wide with a fear that had nothing to do with the weather, the look of a creature both hunted and lost. On her wrist, a dark, ugly bruise was just beginning to bloom, a violent shadow against her pale skin. And at her throat, a delicate, almost impossibly bright diamond necklace glittered, a cold fire in the dim light. She looked at him, then at the small, warm space behind him, and her composure, already as fragile as spun glass, seemed to shatter. I'm sorry to bother you," she stammered, her voice thin and shaky. "My car broke down. My phone is dead. Could I just wait here until the rain stops?" Nathan Reyes was a man who understood broken things. He saw the lie about the car in her eyes, but he also saw the desperate truth beneath it. He didn't see a problem to be solved or a liability to be weighed. He simply saw a human being standing in the rain. In the quiet language of the heart, he heard a story she wasn't yet ready to tell. He stepped back, opening the door wider, a silent invitation. "Of course," he said, his voice as calm and steady as a lighthouse beam in a storm. "Come in, out of the cold." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if accepting an act of kindness without a price tag was a foreign and dangerous concept. Then, with a shuddering breath, she stepped over the threshold, bringing the scent of rain and a world of secrets into his quiet home. "My name is Sarah." She said the name sounding practiced a shield she held up before her. Nathan simply nodded. He didn't offer questions or judgment. He offered her a towel, a blanket from the back of the worn armchair, and a space on their small, lumpy couch. He offered her nothing but shelter and silence. He had no idea he was offering her a new beginning, a chance to find the one thing her fortune could never buy a home. Isabel Harrington. The woman who now called herself Sarah woke slowly surfacing from the first dreamless sleep she'd had in years. For a moment, she was adrift, uncertain of where she was. The morning light filtering through the small window was soft and gray, a stark contrast to the automated light-blocking shades of her penthouse apartment that opened with silent digital precision. The air didn't smell of imported espresso and the faint sterile scent of glass cleaner. It smelled of something warm, sweet, and faintly of cinnamon. It smelled like a memory she couldn't quite place, a forgotten language of comfort. It smelled like home. She sat up, the blanket Nathan had given her pooling around her waist. The couch itself was old and faded, its springs groaning in protest as she moved, but it had held her more securely than any $1,000 mattress. Her clothes from the night before, he'd told her he would put them in the dryer, were folded neatly on a chair beside her. The simple act of care was so foreign, so unexpected, it felt like a grand gesture. From the tiny adjoining kitchen, she heard the sizzle of batter hitting a pan, and the sound of a child's delighted giggle. Peeking around the corner, she saw a scene of such simple, unvarnished domesticity that it felt like a painting from another century. Nathan stood at the stove, a faded apron tied around his waist, his back to her. Mia was perched on a stool, her small hands carefully arranging blueberries on a plate. "A T-Rex needs 3 eyes, Daddy," Mia declared, with the unshakable confidence of a 5-year-old paleontologist. Nathan chuckled, a low, warm sound that seemed to vibrate with pure affection. 3 eyes it is. And does this T-Rex like syrup, or is he a savory dinosaur? He likes syrup, Mia confirmed. And sprinkles. Lots and lots of sprinkles. Isabel watched unseen, a ghost in this small kingdom of love. In her world, breakfast was a silent affair, served by staff on porcelain plates, a perfectly balanced meal curated by a nutritionist. Food was fuel. It was a component of a high-performance life. Here, food was joy. It was connection. It was a father making dinosaur-shaped pancakes for his daughter because her smile was the most valuable asset in his portfolio. This simple act of love felt more luxurious, more profoundly wealthy than any Michelin-starred meal she had ever eaten. "Good morning," Nathan said, turning as if he'd sensed her presence. His smile was easy without artifice. It didn't ask for anything, it simply offered. "There's coffee if you'd like. It's not fancy, but it's hot." Isabel felt a blush creep up her neck. She was an intruder here, a creature of marble and steel, in a world of worn wood and warm fabrics. "Thank you." She managed, her voice still rough with sleep. She accepted the mug he offered. It was thick and chipped at the rim, with a faded picture of a cartoon cat on it. She wrapped her hands around its warmth, a small anchor in this unfamiliar sea. Mia slid off her stool and approached Isabel, her expression serious. She held out the plate of pancakes. "This one's for you," she said. "He's a stegosaurus. He's a vegetarian, so he's very kind." Isabel stared at the lopsided, blueberry-eyed creature on the plate. A lump formed in her throat. No one had made her something with their own hands since she was a small child, before her mother had passed away, and her father had replaced affection with expectation. A simple pancake, a creation of flour and love, felt like an offering of unimaginable generosity. "Thank you, Mia," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "He's perfect." As she sat at the small, wobbly kitchen table, eating a pancake shaped like a kind dinosaur, Isabel looked around the tiny apartment. It was filled with books stacked in corners, crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, and the quiet dignity of a life built not on what was owned, but on what was shared. It was a world of quiet rituals, of bedtime stories, and burned toast of a love so palpable it was a physical presence in the room. And she who had everything money could buy felt an ache of poverty so deep it stole her breath. The days began to blur into a gentle, unfamiliar rhythm. Isabel, the woman still wearing the name Sarah, like a borrowed coat, found her place in the quiet corners of Nathan and Mia's life. She washed dishes, her hands accustomed to the sterile touch of touchscreens and boardroom tables, now learning the language of warm, soapy water. She learned to fold laundry, the simple, repetitive motion, a strange kind of meditation. She read stories to Mia, her voice usually reserved for terse business negotiations, softening as she spoke of talking animals and faraway lands where kindness was the only currency. But the ghost of Isabel Harrington was never far away. It lived in the cold, heavy weight of the diamond necklace she still wore. She couldn't bring herself to take it off. It was a gift from her father presented on her engagement to a man she did not love, a man chosen to merge two corporate dynasties. Her father had called it an investment in the future. She had felt its clasp lock around her neck like the final click of a cage door. Now in this tiny apartment, filled with a warmth money couldn't buy, it felt like a brand, a glittering shackle that reminded her of the gilded prison she had escaped. It was a constant cold whisper of a life that did not belong here. One afternoon, while Nathan was at work and Mia was napping, Isabel stood before the small cracked mirror in the bathroom. She stared at the woman in the reflection, her hair now clean and brushed, wearing a simple t-shirt Nathan had loaned her. She looked younger, softer, more like herself. But the necklace blazed against her skin, a declaration of a world built on power and possession. With trembling fingers, she unclasped it. The sudden lightness around her neck was dizzying. She held the cascade of flawless, ice-cold diamonds in her palm. It was worth more than this entire apartment building, more than Nathan would make in a decade of cleaning floors. It was an obscene weight in this home, where value was measured in laughter and shared meals. She quickly hid it in the bottom of her borrowed bag, feeling a pang of shame, as if she were smuggling a weapon into a sanctuary. That evening, as they sat at the dinner table sharing a simple meal of rice and beans, Nathan spoke about his late wife, Elena. He did it naturally, without ceremony, pointing to a small framed photo on a shelf. In the picture, a woman with a radiant smile was holding a paintbrush. Elena would have loved Mia's new painting. He said, a gentle sadness in his eyes that had long ago made peace with grief. She was the real artist in the family. She used to say that art wasn't about making things pretty, it was about making them true. Isabel found herself speaking before she could stop. I lost my mother when I was young too. It was a small true thing, a crack in the facade of Sarah. Nathan looked at her, his gaze filled with a quiet, knowing empathy. He didn't press for more. He didn't ask about her father or the rest of her fabricated story. He just nodded, a shared understanding passing between them in the candlelight. It changes the shape of the world, doesn't it? He said softly. Losing someone who was your home. The word home struck her with physical force. She had lived in mansions, penthouses, and estates all over the world, but she had never had a home. Not like this. Later that night, unable to sleep, she found Nathan on the small fire escape, a metal perch overlooking the sleeping city. He was staring at the distant glittering towers of the financial district, the very world she had run from. "Can't sleep?" he asked, not sounding surprised to see her. "Too loud," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "In my head." He smiled faintly. "I know that feeling." He was silent for a long moment, then said, "You don't have to tell me what you're running from, Sarah, but I hope you know you're safe here. You and the ghost you're carrying." He had seen it. He had seen the weight she carried, the invisible specter of her past. He didn't judge it. He didn't try to fix it. He simply acknowledged it, giving it space to exist alongside her. In that moment, Isabel felt a profound sense of relief. Being seen, truly seen, was a terrifying and beautiful thing. The ghost of the necklace felt a little less heavy. The bruise on Isabel's wrist had faded from a raw, angry purple to a mottled pattern of yellow and green, a dying constellation on her skin. She had kept it hidden, wearing the long-sleeved shirts Nathan had loaned her, but one morning, while reaching for a high shelf in the kitchen, her sleeve slid down. Mia, with the unfiltered observational power of a child, saw it first. "You have a rainbow on your arm." The little girl stated, her tone matter of fact, not of judgment. Isabel froze, pulling her sleeve down quickly, a familiar spike of shame and fear rising in her chest. Nathan, who was making coffee nearby, turned. His eyes flickered to her wrist for a brief second, his expression unreadable, before he knelt down to Mia's level. "That's right, sweetie," he said softly to his daughter, his voice a gentle balm. "Sometimes people get rainbows when they bump into things too hard. We have to be extra gentle with them until they fade away." His words were for Mia, but the message was a shield for Isabel. He wasn't asking for an explanation. He wasn't demanding the story behind the wound. He was offering a perimeter of safety, a space where she didn't have to defend her pain. Later that day, after Mia was dropped off at her preschool, Isabel sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea. The silence felt heavy with unspoken things. Nathan approached her, not with questions, but with a small tube of arnica cream. "My wife used this," he said quietly, placing it on the table in front of her. "She was clumsy, always walking into door frames." He smiled a little at the memory, a fleeting shadow of a shared life. "It helps with the rainbows." He didn't touch her. He didn't force the issue. He simply provided a tool for healing and left the choice entirely to her. Hesitantly, Isabel rolled up her sleeve. The bruise looked ugly in the clear light of day. Without a word, Nathan sat down across from her. He gently took her hand, his touch so light it was barely there, and began to apply the cream. His fingers were rough from work, calloused and strong, but his touch was incredibly tender. He worked in silence, his focus entirely on the simple act of care. Isabel felt tears welling in her eyes. The bruise was a parting gift from her fiancé, his grip like iron on her wrist when she told him she couldn't go through with the wedding. It was a mark of ownership, of control. Nathan's touch was the opposite. It was a gesture of release, of gentle, unconditional kindness. "You don't ask many questions," she whispered, her voice thick. He finished applying the cream, his gaze still on her wrist. "Some things don't have easy words," he said. He paused, then looked up, and the truth of him seemed to settle in the small room. "I used to be a language teacher before. Well, before Elena got sick. I taught linguistics at the university." Isabel stared at him, stunned. A janitor, a former professor of linguistics. The two images didn't fit, yet somehow they made perfect, heartbreaking sense. He was a man who understood syntax, grammar, the very building blocks of communication. He understood that the most important things are often communicated in the silences, in the gestures, in the scars that tell a story no tongue could articulate. "What I learned," he continued, finally meeting her eyes, his own deep, with a wisdom that went far beyond books, "is that every language has its own structure, its own truth. And pain is a language too. You don't need to translate it for me, Sarah. I can hear it just fine." In that moment, Isabel Harrington felt a profound shift. The walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart, the ones built of money and lies and fear, began to crumble. This man, this quiet, unassuming janitor, saw her more clearly than anyone in her entire life. He didn't just see the runaway heiress or the woman with a fake name. He saw the language of her scars, and he wasn't afraid to listen. Life in the tiny apartment settled into a new kind of normal. Isabel, who had once managed a staff of dozens and tracked multi-million-dollar investments before breakfast, found a strange and profound satisfaction in simple tasks. She learned the exact way Nathan liked his coffee, strong black and in the chipped cat mug. She learned the spot on the floorboard that creaked if you stepped on it just so, and the title of Mia's favorite bedtime story, which she could now recite by heart. She was becoming fluent in the language of this small, warm world, but she was also becoming acutely aware of its fragility. She saw the stack of bills on the corner of the counter, their final notice warnings printed in stark red ink. She saw the way Nathan would sometimes eat a smaller portion at dinner, claiming he wasn't hungry to ensure she and Mia had enough. She saw the worn-out soles of his work boots held together with a quiet prayer and a bit of glue, and the worry that sometimes flickered in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. One afternoon, a letter arrived. An official-looking envelope that felt heavy with bad news. It was an eviction notice. The building had been sold to a new developer, and rents were doubling immediately. They had 60 days to comply or vacate. Isabel saw Nathan read it, his face going pale, his shoulders slumping for just a moment before he straightened them, a familiar mask of quiet resolve falling back into place. He tucked the letter away, not wanting to worry her or Mia. But she had seen. That night, after he left for his shift, cleaning the empty, echoing halls of a corporate tower, Isabel couldn't sit still. The diamond necklace hidden in her bag felt like it was burning a hole through the cheap fabric. It was the answer. A simple, vulgar, immediate answer. She could solve this. She could end his worry, buy him 100 pairs of new boots, fill his cupboards, secure their future. She could pay him back for his kindness. The thought was both a relief and a betrayal. When he returned in the early hours of the morning, smelling of industrial cleaner and bone-deep exhaustion, she was waiting for him on the couch. "Nathan," she said, her voice low and serious. "We need to talk. I want to help." He looked at her, tired but patient. "Help with what, Sarah?" She took a deep breath and pulled the necklace from her bag. It glittered obscenely in the dim light of the single lamp, a constellation of cold fire. His eyes widened slightly, not with greed or shock, but with a kind of sad, knowing understanding. It's worth a lot." She said the words, feeling clumsy and inadequate. "More than enough to solve the rent problem. Enough for a down payment on a place of your own. Please, let me do this. You've given me so much." Nathan looked from the necklace in her hand to her face. He didn't move to take it. He just sat down in the armchair across from her, the springs sighing under his weight. "You think this is what I need?" he asked, his voice gentle without a trace of judgment. "It would fix everything," she insisted, desperation coloring her tone. He shook his head slowly. "Sarah, what we have here," he said, gesturing to the small, imperfect room around them. "It can't be bought. It's built. Out of trust. Out of showing up every day. Out of making dinosaur pancakes when you're tired because it makes a little girl happy." He leaned forward, his gaze intense but kind. "I appreciate the offer, more than you know. But my problems are mine to solve. And I will not take payment for an act of basic human decency. My dignity isn't for sale." He looked at the necklace again. "That thing, it's a part of the world you were running from, using it to fix my world. It doesn't solve anything. It just invites that world in. And I like my world just the way it is." He was refusing a fortune. He was choosing his quiet integrity over an easy solution. In her life, money had always been the answer. It was a tool, a weapon, a balm. But it couldn't buy this. It couldn't buy the unwavering character of a man who knew with absolute certainty what was for sale and what was not. Isabel slowly closed her hand around the diamonds, the cold metal biting into her palm. She felt a profound sense of shame and an even more profound sense of awe. She was beginning to understand that there were different kinds of rich in the world, and by every measure that truly mattered, Nathan Reyes was the wealthiest man she had ever known. The citywide blackout stretched into its second day, a consequence of the storm that had first brought Isabel to Nathan's door. The world outside the tiny apartment felt chaotic and uncertain, plunged into a pre-modern darkness. But inside, a quiet magic was taking hold. The absence of electricity stripped away all distractions, the hum of the refrigerator, the glow of screens, the constant noise of a world that never sleeps. It left only the essentials, warmth, food, and each other. Life was reduced to the comforting glow of candles and the steady beam of Nathan's old flashlight. That night, the storm returned, a gentler rain this time, a soft tapping on the window panes, like a quiet reminder of their shared beginning. Mia nestled between Isabel and Nathan on the couch, a small warm weight connecting them, declared it was time for the flashlight story. It was a ritual Isabel had come to cherish, a small ceremony of light against the darkness. Nathan picked up the book, the same one from the night Isabel had arrived, its cover soft with use. "All right, brave knight," he began, his voice a low murmur that was a comfort in itself. "Let's see where we left off." He aimed the flashlight at the pages, but its beam was weak, the light flickering and dim. The batteries were giving up their ghost. "Looks like our light is running out of courage," he said with a small sigh. "I have one," Isabel said, suddenly remembering the small, powerful LED flashlight she kept in her designer handbag, a forgotten relic from her other life. She retrieved it and clicked it on. A bright, clean white light flooded the room, sharp and efficient. It was a cold, clinical light, the kind used to expose flaws. It was a stark contrast to the warm, flickering glow of Nathan's old light, which seemed designed to soften them. Mia blinked in the sudden brightness. "It's too loud," she whispered, burrowing closer to her father. Isabel frowned. "It's just a light, sweetie. It doesn't make a sound." "No," Mia insisted, shaking her head with the profound certainty of a child. "Daddy's light is a story light. Yours is a walking in the dark by yourself light." The innocent wisdom of the child's words struck Isabel with the force of a physical blow. Her flashlight was for solitude, for navigating dangerous parking garages and unfamiliar hotel corridors alone. It was a tool of self-reliance, born of a deep and abiding loneliness. Nathan's light was for sharing, for creating a circle of warmth and imagination. It was a tool of connection. Quietly, Isabel switched her flashlight off, plunging them back into the gentle intimacy of the candlelight. Nathan gave her a small, understanding smile and continued the story with his fading light, holding it closer to the page. He read of the knight who was afraid and the dragon who was lonely, and how they found courage not in armor or fire, but in each other. His voice was hypnotic, and soon Mia's breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep. He gently lifted his daughter into his arms to carry her to bed. When he returned, Isabel was still sitting on the couch, bathed in the soft glow of a single candle. "She's right, you know," Isabel said, her voice barely a whisper. "About the light. Kids see things clearly." Nathan replied, sitting not on the far end of the couch, but a little closer than he usually did. The small space between them felt charged with unspoken emotion, a quiet electricity all its own. "I've spent my whole life walking in the dark by myself," she confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I thought that was strength, being untouchable, needing no one. Stillness isn't the absence of fire," Nathan said softly, his gaze steady and warm. "It's knowing where to set it, and needing someone. That's not weakness, Sarah. It's what makes us human." He reached out his hand, hovering for a moment, before gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers were warm against her skin. It was a simple, chaste gesture, yet it felt more intimate than any kiss she had ever received. It was a touch that saw her, the real, her hiding beneath the layers of lies and fear. They sat there in the quiet, the candlelight dancing on their faces, the rain a gentle lullaby outside. The power was out. The world was dark, but for the first time in her life, Isabel Harrington didn't feel like she was alone in the dark. She was sharing the light, and it was a fairy tale more beautiful than any she had ever read in a book. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, a jarring digital shriek from the burner phone Isabel had bought for emergencies. She was alone in the apartment, folding laundry, the simple domestic act, a stark contrast to the life that was about to come roaring back. She saw the blocked number on the screen, and her heart leaped into her throat. Time slowed down. The scent of clean cotton faded, replaced by the cold metallic taste of fear. She answered her voice a tight whisper. "Hello, Isabel." The voice on the other end was cold, precise, and instantly recognizable. It was Arthur Vance, her father's chief legal counsel and designated fixer. The man who erased problems. She was a problem. "Your little holiday is over. Your father is displeased. The Harrington-Sterling merger is at a critical juncture. Your presence is required." Isabel's blood ran cold. The word required hung in the air, a command, not a request. "I'm not coming back, Arthur. That is not a viable option," he replied, his tone devoid of emotion. "We have, of course, been monitoring your activities. A word of advice. Do not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Your father has immense resources." He then switched to a specific high-level financial dialect of Mandarin, a language her father had insisted she master for business. It was a coded threat, a subtle but unmistakable reference to a sensitive deal. He knew she was personally involved, in a reminder of the intricate, invisible web she was still caught in. "Don't call me again." She managed her hand trembling as she ended the call. She leaned against the counter, her breath coming in ragged gasps. They knew where she was. The sanctuary she had found was no longer safe. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't realize Nathan had come home early from his shift until he spoke, his voice gentle. "Everything all right, Sarah?" She jumped, spinning around to face him. His expression was one of quiet concern. How much had he heard? The panic was a wild animal in her chest. It was nothing. She lied, her voice unsteady. A wrong number. Nathan didn't challenge her. He simply walked to the refrigerator, took out a carton of juice for Mia, and then he said very calmly, "That financial dialect they use in Shanghai. It's fascinating, isn't it? The tones shift entirely when discussing futures contracts versus tangible assets. Very specific." Isabel froze, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. He had understood. He had understood the Mandarin. The janitor, the former linguistics professor, had just revealed another layer of his hidden depths. He knew she was lying. He knew she was more than just Sarah, the down-on-her-luck woman with a broken-down car. She waited for the accusation, for the anger, for the demand for truth. It never came. Instead, he turned to her. His eyes filled not with suspicion, but with a profound and gentle empathy that completely disarmed her. "Whoever you are," he said, his voice low and steady, "whatever you're running from, you're safe here. I told you that, and I meant it. You don't owe me an explanation. You only owe it to yourself to be safe." He was giving her an out. He was holding up a shield for her, protecting her secret even from himself. He was choosing to trust her even when he knew she wasn't being entirely truthful. This quiet, powerful act of faith was more stunning than any threat, more valuable than any diamond. Tears of gratitude and relief, hot and sudden, streamed down her face. She had spent her life surrounded by people who demanded truths, who used information as leverage, who saw vulnerability as a weakness to be exploited. This man, who had every reason to be suspicious, chose trust instead. He chose kindness. "My name," she whispered the two words, feeling monumental, a truth she hadn't realized she was so desperate to share. "My real name is Isabel." He simply nodded, as if he'd known all along, or as if the name itself was less important than the person standing before him. "It's nice to meet you, Isabel," he said, and his smile was a promise. Welcome home. A week after she confessed her real name, the city was blessed with a perfect Saturday. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue, and a warm breeze carrying the sweet scent of freshly cut grass rustled the leaves of the trees. Nathan declared it was a mandatory park day, a concept as foreign to Isabel as poverty had once been. Her childhood had been a curated schedule of tutors' lessons and charity galas, where she was more of a prop than a participant. A park was something you saw from the tinted window of a chauffeured car. They walked to the local park, a sprawling democratic green space filled with the sounds of laughing children and barking dogs. Mia ran ahead, her pigtails flying behind her like tiny flags of joy, while Nathan carried a worn blanket and a small cooler. Isabel walked beside him, feeling strangely self-conscious and wonderfully anonymous in her borrowed jeans and t-shirt. No one here knew her as Isabel Harrington, the runaway heiress whose face had graced the society pages. She was just a woman with a man and a little girl, enjoying the simple, profound gift of a sunny afternoon. They found a spot under a large oak tree. Nathan spread the blanket, and Mia immediately began a series of dramatic somersaults, her small body a whirl of uninhibited happiness. Isabel found herself laughing a real, unforced laugh that bubbled up from deep inside her. The sound surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed like that without calculation or agenda. Nathan smiled, watching her. "It's a good sound," he said, his voice warm with an affection that was becoming as familiar as her own heartbeat. Later, he bought them ice cream from a vendor, insisting on paying with the crumpled bills from his pocket. Isabel got chocolate, Mia got strawberry, and Nathan got vanilla. They sat on a park bench, their shoulders occasionally brushing, as Mia chattered on about squirrels and clouds that looked like dragons. It was so normal, so breathtakingly beautifully normal. There were no agendas, no hidden meanings, just sun sugar and the simple pleasure of being together, of sharing a small fleeting moment of sweetness. "Let me show you something," Nathan said after they'd finished their ice cream. He led her and Mia to a small enclosed carousel near the playground, its painted horses rising and falling to the tinny, cheerful sound of calliope music. "I can't," Isabel said automatically. The thought of being on public display, even in this small way, triggered a lifetime of conditioning to avoid attention, to remain unseen unless it was on her family's terms. "Why not?" Mia asked, tugging on her hand, her logic simple and irrefutable. "The pink horse is lonely." Nathan looked at her, his eyes gentle but challenging, seeing the fear she thought she was hiding. "What are you afraid of, Isabel?" She was afraid of being seen, of being recognized. She was afraid of her father's reach, of Arthur Vance's cold voice on the phone. She was afraid that this beautiful, fragile dream would shatter. But looking at Mia's hopeful face and at Nathan's quiet confidence in her, another feeling began to rise up, a defiant desire for joy. "Nothing," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'm not afraid of anything." She let Mia pull her toward the carousel. She chose the lonely pink horse, its paint chipped and faded, its expression one of patient waiting. And as the carousel began to turn, a giddy, exhilarating sense of freedom washed over her. The world spun around her in a blur of green grass and blue sky. She saw Nathan standing by the railing, watching her, a wide, genuine smile on his face. He wasn't watching Isabel Harrington, the asset of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He was watching a woman on a pink horse, her hair flying in the wind, her face turned up to the sun. For those few magical minutes, she was free. Free from her name, free from her past, free from her fear. It was just a simple carousel ride in a public park on a sunny afternoon. But for Isabel, it was everything. It was a taste of a life she never knew she was starving for, a life where joy wasn't a commodity to be purchased, but a moment to be lived. The idyllic peace of that Saturday could not last. A dream, no matter how beautiful, must eventually contend with the waking world. The past, as it always does, came to collect its due. It arrived 3 days later, on a night much like the one when Isabel first appeared at their door. The rain was back, a cold, persistent drizzle that slicked the streets and mirrored the dread coalescing in Isabel's stomach. They were in the middle of dinner, a simple meal of spaghetti that Isabel had helped make the sauce, a recipe Nathan had learned from his mother, when the headlights swept across their front window. Not the muted glow of a passing car, but the sharp, piercing xenon beams of 2 luxury sedans that pulled up directly in front of their small home. The cars were black, sleek, and utterly out of place on this forgotten street, like 2 panthers that had wandered into a petting zoo. They hummed with a quiet, menacing power. Isabel's fork clattered onto her plate. She knew. Instantly she knew. Nathan followed her gaze, his body tensing, his hand instinctively going to Mia's shoulder. "Stay here," he said to Isabel, his voice low and steady, but she was already on her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The car doors opened. 2 large men in dark, impeccably tailored suits got out holding black umbrellas that seemed to absorb the light. From the back of the lead car emerged a 3rd man. It was Arthur Vance. He stood on the sidewalk, his expensive hand-stitched leather shoes already getting wet, his gaze fixed on their front door with the cold proprietary disdain of a man used to owning everything he looked at. Nathan opened the door before Arthur could knock. He stood in the doorway, a quiet, unmovable object against the encroaching darkness, a janitor in a faded t-shirt standing his ground against a man who measured his worth in billions. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but firm, an unbreakable wall of quiet dignity. Arthur Vance's gaze flickered over Nathan with dismissal, as if he were a piece of furniture, before landing on Isabel, who stood frozen behind him. "Isabel," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. The use of her real name was a weapon designed to shatter the fragile world she had built here. "Enough of this nonsense. You have caused considerable disruption. Your father sent me to escort you home. This is my home," Isabel heard herself say, her voice shaking but defiant. Arthur let out a short, humorless laugh, a sound like ice cracking. This is a temporary and frankly pathetic lapse in judgment. Your home is where your obligations are." He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto Nathan, his expression turning to one of predatory condescension. "And you," he said, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you are in far over your head. I have here," he gestured to a leather briefcase held by one of his men, "a check for $100,000, a finder's fee, if you will, for your trouble. You will take it, and you will forget you ever saw her." Nathan didn't even glance at the briefcase. His focus was entirely on Arthur. "She's not a lost pet," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying a dangerous weight. "And my decency is not for sale. I assure you, everything has a price." Arthur sneered, his mask of civility slipping to reveal the ugliness beneath. "And if you refuse my generosity, the consequences will be far more costly. A man like you, a janitor with a child, custody battles can be so messy. Accidents happen. You would be wise to consider your position." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. It was a 6-figure threat backed by the immense amoral power of the Harrington Empire. It wasn't just about Isabel anymore. He was threatening Mia. He was threatening to destroy this small, beautiful world Nathan had built out of love and integrity. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Isabel's defiance. She saw the look in Nathan's eyes, not fear for himself, but a fierce protective anger for his daughter. She knew he would fight for them. She also knew it was a fight he couldn't win. Not against this kind of power. She had brought this darkness to his door, and it was up to her to lead it away. The silence after Arthur Vance's threat was thick and suffocating, a vacuum that sucked all the warmth from the small room. The rain continued its steady rhythm, a somber drumbeat to the terrible choice laid before them. Isabel looked at Nathan's face, etched with a protective fury that was more powerful than any weapon her father owned. She looked at Mia, who had crept to the doorway, her small face pale with confusion and fear, her little hands clutching a crayon drawing of a three-eyed dinosaur. And she looked at Arthur, a smug, patient vulture, waiting for his inevitable victory. In that moment, a devastating clarity washed over Isabel. The greatest act of love she could offer this family was to leave it, to become the poison that draws all other poison away. "All right," she said, her voice sounding strangely calm, detached from the storm raging inside her. She had to make this believable. She had to break his heart to save his world. "I'll go." Nathan turned to her, his eyes wide with a disbelief so profound it was a physical blow. "Isabel, no. We can fight this." "No, we can't," she interrupted, forcing a coldness into her tone that she did not feel. It was a performance, the last and most important one of her life. She had to make him believe she was choosing her old life, not being forced from this one. "He's right. This was a mistake, a fantasy. I don't belong here. I can't live like this." Each word was a shard of glass in her throat. She couldn't look at him. She couldn't look at the crayon drawing in Mia's hand. If she did, she would break. Arthur Vance smiled, a thin, triumphant curl of his lips. "A wise decision. Your father will be pleased." She walked past Nathan, not daring to touch him, the small space between them crackling with unspoken grief. She stepped out into the rain, not taking the umbrella one of the men offered. She let the cold rain soak her, a fitting penance for the pain she was causing. As she got into the back of the silent, leather-scented sedan, she glanced back one last time. Nathan was still standing in the doorway, a silhouette of quiet, heartbroken strength, with Mia clinging to his leg. The warm yellow light of their home spilled out onto the wet pavement, an island of love she was sailing away from. The car door shut with a heavy, final thud, severing the connection. As the sedans pulled away, leaving the quiet street, and the only real home she had ever known behind, Isabel frantically searched her pockets. She found a crumpled receipt from the ice cream vendor, a relic from that perfect Saturday. On the back, she wrote a quick, desperate note. At a red light, she rolled down the window. "You," she called out to a bewildered courier on a motorcycle. She pressed a wad of cash and the folded note into his hand. "This address," she commanded, her voice all Harrington authority. "Get this to the man who lives there. Now. It's an emergency." Back at the tiny house, the silence was a physical presence. After putting a crying Mia to bed with promises he wasn't sure he could keep, Nathan stood in the middle of the living room. The space felt vast and empty without her. He saw the plate of spaghetti she had left on the table, a testament to a life interrupted. He felt a rage and a helplessness so profound it threatened to undo him. Had she lied? Was it all a game? Then came the knock. It was the courier, rain-soaked and breathless, holding out the crumpled note. Nathan's hands trembled as he opened it. The note was short, her handwriting a frantic scrawl. "They threatened Mia. I had to go. I had to make them think I was choosing them. This isn't me running away from you. This is me running toward you in the only way I can right now, to protect you. Don't believe what I said. Please, believe this." Beneath the words, she had drawn a small, lopsided dinosaur with 3 eyes. He sank onto the couch, the note clutched in his hand. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a sacrifice. She hadn't run from him. She had run for him. And in that moment, Nathan Reyes, the quiet janitor, the former linguist, knew this wasn't over. He didn't have her father's power or his resources, but he had something stronger. He had the truth, and he had the unwavering belief in a woman who drew dinosaurs on goodbye notes as an act of war. The Harrington Tower was a spear of glass and steel that pierced the sky, a monument to a legacy built on hostile takeovers and ruthless ambition. Isabel was escorted to the penthouse office, a space so large and sterile it felt like a museum to power, where every object was priceless and nothing had any real value. Her father, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will, sat behind a desk the size of a small car. He didn't rise when she entered. He didn't even look up from the document he was signing. The dismissal was a calculated move, a reminder of her place in his world. "Isabel." He said, his voice as cold and polished as the marble floor. "I trust your excursion is out of your system. Arthur has arranged for your fittings. The wedding is back on schedule." She looked at her father, a man she had feared her entire life. But the fear was gone. In its place was a strange, calm clarity. She saw not a titan of industry, but a small, lonely man hiding inside a fortress of his own, making a man so afraid of vulnerability that he had mistaken it for weakness. "There will be no wedding," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. It did not waver. It was the voice of a woman who had finally found her footing on solid ground. Her father's eyes, the color of storm clouds, finally lifted to meet hers. They narrowed. "Do not be a fool. The Harrington-Sterling Union will create the largest logistics conglomerate in the hemisphere. Your feelings are irrelevant. They are a rounding error in the balance sheet of this family. My feelings are the only thing that are relevant." She countered the words, tasting like freedom on her tongue. "I spent the last few weeks in a home where love wasn't a clause in a contract. It was in dinosaur pancakes and bedtime stories read by flashlight. It was in the way a good man, refused a fortune because his integrity was worth more." "You speak of a janitor." Her father scoffed the word an insult. "You would throw away this empire for a man who cleans toilets for a living." "He doesn't just clean toilets," Isabel replied, her voice ringing with a truth so pure it seemed to silence the hum of the city outside. "He builds worlds. He shows up. He stays. He taught me that real strength isn't about how much you can control. It's about how much you can love without condition." She walked closer to the desk, placing her palms flat against its cold, unforgiving surface. This was her boardroom. This was her public showdown. This was the quiet monologue of truth she had been rehearsing in her heart. "You threatened his child father. You sent your attack dog to threaten a little girl to get what you wanted. That's not power. That's weakness. It's the desperate act of a man who knows he can't inspire loyalty, so he has to buy it or beat it into submission." She straightened up, pulling the diamond necklace from her pocket, the ghost that had haunted her for so long. She let it fall onto the desk. It landed with a soft final clatter, a sound of release. "This is yours," she said. "The company, the fortune, the cage, it's all yours. But my name Harrington, that is mine. And I am finally choosing what to do with it." Her father stood, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You walk out that door, you are cut off. You will have nothing." "I will have everything," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in this cold, empty room. "I will have a life that I choose. I will have a home built on trust, not transactions. And I will have someone who knows my real name and loves me anyway." She turned and walked away. She didn't run. She walked with a quiet dignity she had learned from a man in a tiny apartment on a forgotten street. As she stepped into the elevator, leaving the penthouse and the fortune and the gilded cage behind, she felt lighter than she had in her entire life. She had nothing, and for the first time she was truly rich. She returned at dawn. The city was just beginning to stir, bathed in the soft, hopeful light of a new day. She didn't arrive in a luxury sedan, but on foot, carrying nothing but a small bag with a few essentials and the clothes on her back. She stood before the door of the tiny house, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. What if he hadn't gotten the note? What if he believed the cold, cruel words she had said? What if she was too late? She knocked a soft, hopeful rap of her knuckles against the worn wood. The door opened almost immediately, as if he had been waiting up all night. Nathan stood there, his hair messy from sleep, his eyes searching hers, looking for the truth. He looked past her down the empty street, as if expecting to see the black cars, the ghosts of her other life. When he saw she was alone, a slow, radiant smile spread across his face, a sunrise all its own. He didn't speak. He just opened his arms, and she fell into them, burying her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and safety and home. He held her tightly, his hand stroking her hair. It was a hug that said everything. It said, "I got your note. I believed you. I knew you would come back. You are home." From behind him, Mia peeked out, her eyes wide. "Isabel," she whispered, trying out the new real name. Isabel knelt down, her eyes level with the little girl's. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I'm back. For good." Mia launched herself into Isabel's arms. "I missed you," she mumbled into her shoulder. "Daddy burned the pancakes yesterday. They were all black." Isabel laughed through her tears, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that filled the small apartment. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was no longer a temporary shelter. It was the backdrop to her new life. They made breakfast together. This time, Isabel was the one making pancakes, lopsided, imperfect, and full of love. Nathan was on toast duty. He was distracted, watching her with an expression of such open adoration that he didn't notice the smoke until it was too late. He pulled the blackened squares from the toaster with a sheepish grin. "I burned the toast." Isabel looked at him, at his kind eyes and his easy smile. She looked at the burned toast, a small, perfect imperfection. She looked at Mia, who was happily drowning a pancake in syrup, a smear of chocolate on her cheek. This was it. This was real. It was messy and imperfect and breathtakingly beautiful. She didn't need a castle. She didn't need a fortune or a legacy sealed in a boardroom. She needed this. She needed a man who read bedtime stories by flashlight, a little girl who saw rainbows in bruises, and the quiet, steadfast promise of a life shared, a life built. She needed someone who burned the toast and stayed. Because some stories don't end with a grand ball or a kingdom won. Some of the best stories, the ones that truly matter, end quietly on a Tuesday morning with the smell of burned toast and the beautiful, simple truth of a new beginning. What did you think of Nathan and Isabel's story? Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe in second chances and the power of quiet kindness, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Until next time, take care of your heart and take care of each other. And so, in the quiet light of a new day, they weren't a perfect family, but they were real, and real was more than enough, because some stories don't end, they just change key. And when they do, they finally sound like home. What did you think of Nathan and Isabel's story? Did a moment in their journey speak to your heart? We'd love to hear from you in the comments below, and it would mean the world to us if you'd let us know where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to Second Chance Hearts and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new beginning. Thank you for watching Second Chance Hearts. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep believing in the magic of everyday moments.